be ready to tell us what you learned. So we're going to start here with the agricultural revolution. And first guy we have on our list is Jethro Tull. So, who is Jethro Tull and what did he contribute toward the Industrial Revolution? That is you. Well, what did you learn when you did your research?
The seed drill and the horse-drawn plow, and he helped
Improve the plow. Okay. So he is helping to improve the way farmers work, making them more efficiently, make them work more efficiently. What is a seed drill?
It plants seeds.
Plant seeds. Okay.
Like a specific, like they're a certain far apart, and it this way and this way.
So what's that helping to eliminate?
Labor. Nutrients.
Labor, yes. What else?
Loss of nutrients.
Not loss of nutrients. How did they plant seeds before that? Okay, sometimes they go around individually, but that would take forever, wouldn't it? Yeah, they just scattered it. They just spread it out. So when you do that, a lot of that seed ends up wasted because it either grows too close together and you can't really use it, or it falls out of where you want it to be and you can't use it there either. So made much more efficient planting for the farmers. Good. So you should write down some of those things, associate Jethro Tull with helping out the farmers. Yeah, he invented the seed drill. Seed drill or seed planter. Okay. So much more efficient way of doing things. Now, how about Charles Townsend?
He invented the four-crop rotation method, and that was using like wheat, turnips, barley, and clover, and it would just graze the crops, and it was just a faster way.
Yes. So what was the advantage for crop rotation? Why did that reinvent the way people farmed?
Because it helped switching out the different crops, because different crops took different nutrients out of the soil, and so if they rotated it, then the nutrients could reach it.
Do you remember when we talked in the Middle Ages about the transition from the two-field system to the three-field system?
Yeah.
Okay, so now we're going to four-field system. What was in the three-field system, what did they do with that third field? They left it empty. So this was now a whole new thought process. Instead of leaving it empty, now you're going to use all four parts of your field, but instead of leaving it empty, you're actually going to find a crop that is a nutrient to restore some of those fertilizers that you need in your crop. And so then you'd rotate those fields, so you wouldn't plant the same thing in the same field every year. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. So associate Charles Townsend with that new idea. Robert Blakewell, what do you do?
Oh, that is my person.
Okay.
He was the first person, who found a shortcut to livestock improvement.
Okay. Livestock improvement. What do you mean by that?
He was the first of the world's great animal breeders.
Animal breeding. Okay. So associate him with that. What is that going to do to improve the animals if you are going to breed them in a specific way? Why is that an advantage?
I can tell you his great success.
Well, this may not show up on your screen. This may be just you thinking. Mr. Jones? Yes. Kaylin, that's for you. Why would you want to breed animals in a specific way? Haley?
So you know that, like, never mind.
What is the advantage?
Well, the things like people would get from the animals, like maybe their fur.
Okay.
I don't know, like they might want a specific type that was like the most well.
Okay. Let me ask you this question. Do any of you own a dog?
Yeah.
Okay. Did any of you go buy a specific breed of dog because that's one you wanted? Justin, what'd you buy?
I bought a Golden
Golden Retriever, okay? Do you know much about is it a mix? Is it a pure? Okay, why is that important to you? Okay, so you know its characteristics, you know what to expect out of that particular type of dog. So, by purchasing a purebred Golden Retriever, are you ever going to buy a black lab to produce puppies for your family? No, why not?
Because it's a weirdo.
Okay, it's going to make a weird product, right? So, think about this. If I am, listen, if I am growing cattle for meat, or even if I'm growing cattle for milk, if I'm producing cows and I want good milk, if I have a cow over here that is a weak, skinny, pathetic-looking cow, do I want to mate that with a bull and produce another weak, skinny, pathetic-looking cow? No. Now, so, yeah, I guess you're right. But my point is we are going to be selective. We're going to be selective based off of what we are desiring in the outcome of which cattle we're going to allow to breed, which animals we're going to allow to breed. So he came up with this idea of let's be selective with the type of animals that we are breeding and we're producing, so that way we can improve our food, we can also improve our products we're getting out of them. You know, before his ideas, a lot of times they would raise their cattle in the spring, and in the fall they'd slaughter all of their cattle. And they would preserve the meat. Most of the time they didn't have freezers, but they would preserve it with salt. And they would use that to help them survive the winters. And then they'd start all over again with a few cattle that they left behind to be able to produce again for the next year. Well, why is that unwise?
Because they
What if
can
those
die.
cattle die?
Yeah, what if those cattle die? Now you're out. So he said, well, instead of slaughtering all of your animals, let's overpopulate, and then we can kill a few of them for meat to get us through the winter, and then still continue harvesting milk and that type of thing from them throughout the winter. Now, that was key for farms to be able to do that. Now, let's talk about the enclosure movement. This was not assigned to anybody else. This is just something on a side note. But improving agriculture was critical here with enclosure. Essentially, this is what farms began to look like in Europe. Notice the puzzle square pattern that you see in all of these fields. They would build up hedges to divide up the fields, and so every farmer had his own individual field that was now divided up among the people. Now, many of these enclosures were owned by the wealthy, and they would cut off any of the poor people from having access to these farms, and you couldn't cross over into somebody else's, which meant that the poor, small, little farmer guy no longer had a place for his cattle to graze, no longer had a place for his farm to continue to work. So therefore, he had to sell his farm or sell his cattle to the wealthy, and he now had to move to the city and find a job in the city. So the enclosure movement choked off the little guy. It choked off the small farmer, and it forced them to move to the city, which then overpopulated cities. So it depends on which side you're on, if you're on the side with the wealthy landowners or if you are on the side with the small farmers. But forced a lot of them to go leave the land they're working. Now, they didn't own the land. It was still owned by the wealthy landowners. Textile industry. Who's John Kay?
So he made the flying shuttle, which is a machine that uses a wheel to weave, which was very important because before that they had there had to be like two people and they would throw back and forth. I don't know what it was.
Okay,
Throw
so
something back and forth to weave.
yeah, they're spinning the cloth into, or they're spinning the threads into cloth, and this was the main machine I mean, look how complicated that looks. But that was the main machine that they used to weave this into a blanket, into a cloth, into some sort of textile. So the flying shuttle made it possible to speed up this process and make it much more efficient, make it much more quickly produced. Has anybody seen one of these in action at,
Oh, yes.
like on a field trip somewhere or something? Yeah. It's pretty interesting. It's big, cumbersome, time-consuming, but it is very cool. And it's pretty impressive that they were able to figure that out and put that together. James Hargreaves, and I merged him together with Richard Arkwright. So we'll talk about both of them together. So let's talk about Hargreaves first. Who did I give that to? Okay.
So he made the spinning jenny at
Mhm.
Christina, and it was basically like a mechanized weaving system, so kind of like what we did.
Yep.
And then the other guy, Richard Arkwright, made what was called the water frame, and I think it was basically just the same thing, but it was powered by water,
Yes.
and it was mainly created to produce cotton thread.
Yep.
And I don't know if this is like accurate, but I found it, and it said that the machines weighed like what is modern day over 1 million.
Over what?
Over like it said 1 million pounds.
It could be.
I'm
I-
pretty sure that's what it said.
Yeah, I wouldn't doubt that actually. So the spinning jenny, you can see here, it was a hand crank system where you had somebody sitting there just spinning this wheel by hand. And the advantage here to the spinning jenny was that you could spin 8 threads at a time. And so they would run the cotton or the wool, depending on which one they were using. They would have those piles of it. They would spin it through here, and it would spool up on these spindles right here. And they could do 8 at one time. And those of you that do any sewing or seen your mom sew, they get those little spools of thread. You know, you buy them for $1 at Walmart. They had to actually go through and spin all of that, so that way you could use it for sewing and knitting and that type of thing. Yes?
They can do 128 threads at once, and I'm trying to find the weight.
128?
128.
Sweet. Okay, so then Richard Arkwright's approval of that was the fact that he connected that to water power rather than a hand crank. And so you would set up one of these next to a stream or something, and it would continue that movement going. Yes?
Is that what they used in like cotton mills and stuff?
Yes. A lot of times it would be. Richard Arkwright is considered the father of the Industrial Revolution because of his use of a renewable source like water to be able to replace manpower. And that started getting people's minds going, okay, what else could we do to alleviate the workload of the human body? That's going to lead them to spark ideas like steam power, coal power, oil, all those type of things to produce these other machines. And so we give that credit here to Richard Arkwright for his invention. Not only here, but he had a number of other things that he tried to improve throughout the Industrial Revolution. Let's move on to Samuel Crompton, who had, Sam, go ahead, Victoria.
So he invented the spinning wheel, and to do that he used 2 earlier inventions called the spinning jenny and the Arkwright's water frame.
Mm-hmm.
For the spinning jenny he used the moving carriage, and then for the Arkwrights he used the rollers. And then 40 million pounds of cotton wool was spun annually. And then he was tricked by the textile manufacturers into giving a secret of his invention. And then that's how it started the textile industry.
Yeah. That's a whole interesting story we don't have time to go into, where he was tricked into giving away the key patent, the key information to his invention, and it was stolen and brought over to the United States. Now, the spinning mule, compared to previous inventions, this one could do up to 1,000 of these spools at a time. And so that's why it was such a significant improvement here as well. Only reason why it ever slowed down was because they'd run out of cotton. So if they didn't have enough cotton, they'd have to shut down production. Otherwise, this could go continuously. And this sparked the desire and the demand for more cotton. Well, where are they going to get it from?
The slaves.
What slaves?
American.
American slaves. So the argument can be made that had we not had such high demand for cotton, there wouldn't have been such a demand for slaves in the United States. It's not a great argument, but it can be made. And perhaps had that not been developed, perhaps slavery would have died out in the United States, but there's a lot of things that would not have happened either had we not had the spinning mule. Let's talk about Eli Whitney. We know that he invented the cotton gin. And what was the purpose of the cotton gin, and why did it improve the Industrial Revolution? Haley?
Didn't it take like the hard stuff off of it?
Yep. It took the seeds out. This was the most time-consuming process of producing any sort of fabric, was that cotton seeds had this sticky substance on them that when you pulled the cotton off the plant, you had to open up the cotton, you had to find the seed, you had to pluck it out, and then now the cotton is usable. It's not like the cotton balls you get in the bag from Walmart or the dollar store that are nice and soft. Cotton was soft. I actually tested this once down in Georgia. There's a lot of cotton fields still down there. We were on a bus trip, and we pulled off at a rest area, and I saw cotton field or cotton growing off next to the road. I'm like, okay, I'm going to check this out. So I did. I walked over there. It was not any farmer's field or anything. It was just randomly growing up there next to the fence. I pulled out a piece of cotton. I'm like, I want to see how hard it is to actually pull the seed out. And it was really tricky because not only was it sticky, but like if you pulled it out too quickly, you'd pull all the cotton with it, and the little bit you had left was not worth anything. So in order to preserve the cotton, you really had to peel it and pry it open, and then reach in there, start loosening up all those cotton fibers, and then you can pluck it out, and then you've got this little tiny ball of cotton. And that's how they had to do it prior to the cotton gin. So when they get the cotton, when Eli Whitney invents the cotton gin, it's got this two-spindle system here where you stick your raw cotton in here, and there's a comb on this turning mechanism that will comb through the cotton. It will start separating the seed from the fibers, and it'll spit out the seeds right here, and it'll put out the cotton in this side, and then this spindle would then fluff the cotton back up, and it would reconnect some of the fibers, and then you could take that cotton, then put it into the spinning mule, and you could spin that into a spool of thread and then sell it.
Seeds missing? Like, did they ever miss any seeds and got stuck into the old cotton?
I don't know. I couldn't tell you. I mean, I suppose that would be possible, that it didn't catch everything. Now, there was a grate, like you see here, where it's actually got to fit through there, and so I think the way Whitney had designed it, that for the most part, it would catch all the seeds, and they could not fit through that grate. There were probably some small seeds that did slide through that it didn't catch. But that was key to sparking and to moving forward with the cotton industry and textile industry. And that's going to bring up more and more factories across Europe and even the United States as well. So in the factory system, most of the workers that came to the factory system were people from outside the cities originally, and they were coming in from the rural areas, and many of them, before they got involved in the factory system and the domestic system of way of life, is that they would come into town, they would find out what needs to be produced, they would take home the materials, they'd make it at home, then they'd bring it back into town. That's called the domestic system. Essentially, you are taking an order from somebody, you're going back home, you're working on it, you're bringing it back into town, and then you're selling it. Yeah, like homework, right. That proved to be very inefficient because you're wasting a lot of time moving back and forth. Plus, if you get home and you find out, oh, I'm out of the color orange. I really needed orange for this blanket that I'm supposed to be making. Now you got to go back into town, you got to get orange, you got to come back. So owners of the company decided that they were going to start making factories and encouraging people to come into town, work the factory, we'll provide all the materials you need, you come in, you work, and then you go home at the end of the day. In our mind, we think, well, yeah, duh, that's like the way life works. Not for them. This was a totally new concept that you would come to somebody else's place and you'd work in their factory or you'd work in their building and then you'd go home. So it was a total change in mindset and change in thought from the domestic system to the factory system. And it brings the workers, the raw materials, and the machinery under one roof for the very first time. With that comes a number of changes for the worker. So if you have a job and you begin working inside a factory and that you're working there for 10 or 12 hours a day, do you want to spend a lot of time walking back home? No. So what are you going to do? You're going to move closer. You're going to find a place in the city. So it brings people back to the city, and now we have to find a place for all these people to live. One of the other changes you see for the worker here is you see the fact that you now are using somebody else's tools. The factory provides the tools and they provide all the resources that you need. You no longer are using your own tools. And so as you move near the factories, you use the factory tools. And your work hours are also dictated by your employer. In the domestic system, if you didn't feel like working today, you didn't work today. You just decide, I'm not going to make a blanket. I'm just going to stay home, play with my kids. No big deal. It just means I can't sell that blanket today. But in the factory system, if you don't work today, what's your boss going to say? No money, and we're going to find somebody that will work today, and you're fired. Right. So they had to make that life adjustment, and that is often an adjustment for many high school students as well when you get into the workforce and you find out that your boss doesn't like when you just call them up or text them and say, hey, I don't feel like working today, so can you find somebody to replace me? They'll say, yeah, permanently. So getting used to work hours is something that they have to do. And then working away from family. In the domestic system, you take your work home with you and you work at home and you got your kids around with you and you got your husband probably working out in the field, or if the husband is the one doing the work, then he's got his wife working around the house as well. So now you're away from your family. And so what do you think that does to the family life and the family situation for people that had gone through this? Justin, what did you say? Yeah, why would it break it apart? Yeah, you're not spending as much time together, especially for the first couple of generations as they are getting used to these new changes. It definitely has an impact on family life. So dads are not there for their kids like they want to be or like their dad was for them. So kids are now free to kind of go do what they want to do, and they get themselves into some trouble. Or the kids end up having to help work in the factories as well, which we're going to talk about here either today or next time. Yeah. They were very bad. Yeah. So we may get to some of that today. I'm not sure if we're going to have time to get to some of that today. One of the key factors besides textiles and fabrics was iron and steel. So we're going to begin with Henry Cort. Who had Henry Cort? Justin, I think it's you. What did Henry Cort do?
Rose, knives, iron industry, roll, to finish iron. Yep.
Grooved rollers. Okay, what does that mean?
It's something that he made to finish iron.
So what that did was that eliminated the impurities out of iron. What do we know about iron?
Iron is a metal.
It's a metal, yeah. It's very strong. Why is it strong?
Because it's a metal.
Because of Iron Man. Great. Because it's pure. Iron that has impurities in it is brittle and weak and breaks easily. So when previous civilizations had tried to use iron, and they did, they'd go into battle and they would try to use a sword. A lot of times it would shatter because it was impure. And so when he developed a way to eliminate those impurities and to have pure iron ore, they're able to make something much stronger than ever. Now, I also assigned Henry Bessemer to you. What did he do?
Henry Bessemer was an inventor and an engineer who developed the first process for manufacturing steel intensity.
Yes. So his credit and claim to fame is the development of steel. And carbon, and a few other minerals to the iron in order to make the steel. Yeah. Awesome. It could be, but it's not. Okay, new source of power. James Watt. What did James Watt do?
He invented steam engine. They said he invented desktop copy machine too.
The desktop copy machine, yeah. That's not like, what we think of today, but that was a manual thing where they had ink and they had a wheel system and copy machine. No. And you would hand crank that thing and it would roll over the new sheet of paper and it would roll out a copy of the old inscription. It was really advanced and pretty awesome. But the steam engine is his best known invention, and so the steam engine was very significant when he developed that, because you could now use that to power very heavy machinery. So the work of what we used to have a number of horses to be able to do could now be run by a small steam engine. And it could continue to run without fatigue and without getting worn out and tired like animals or people could. We also have some new energy sources that come here near the end of the 1800s. One of those new sources is electricity. And electricity is going to be developed and is going to be implemented into a lot of these factories and is going to replace steam power as well. Transportation was also significant. We have something called a turnpike trust. It was very expensive to build roads, very time-consuming, and not a lot of people could do that on their own. Not a lot of people want to spend their money on roads. So knowing that roads were going to be good for business, because now we could transport our stuff much more efficiently and easily, different business owners decided to work together to contribute a small portion of the cost toward that road to pay for it. And they called those turnpike trusts. So if we were to build a road, we might get the 6 of you together, and you all agree that you're going to contribute a small percentage toward the road. And when you build that road, you have invested, let's say, $10,000 into that road. When you set up the road and it's opened up, you're going to put in place a turnpike, which essentially is a tax or a toll for people to use your road. It's exactly like a toll bridge. And so when people come through, they've got to pay $1 every time they want to use your road. And you guys get to reap the benefits of that because you built the road. Now, most people would build that. Once they got their money back with a little bit of interest, they would open that up and make it free. Not always. Sometimes they continue to make a profit off of that. But that was what the Turnpike Trust was intended to do. Who had John McAdam? Okay, what was his contribution?
Okay, so the first thing I found is that he had the idea to elevate roads
Okay.
and help prevent drainage
Mhm.
onto the roads. And he also had the idea to, instead of having mud and dirt roads, to have crushed foundations like gravel.
Yes. Like that picture shows right there, they put crushed rock as the foundation of the roads instead of mud or dirt, and it made them last longer, it made them drain better, and made the roads a whole lot more effective. Canals were also an important part of transportation. Many of these canals were dug next to the roads or where roads could not be done. And so you would put your goods that you needed to travel on a flatbed, and you would have a mule or a horse pull that along the side of the canal. And if you've ever read Huckleberry Finn or Tom Sawyer, he talks a little bit about the flatbeds and going up and down the Mississippi River, some of the canals there as well. That was an important part of that. Richard Trevithick.
Richard Trevor was a British beginner
Okay. So he's credited with the steam locomotive. And this transformed transportation as well as it made, I don't know. This was a replica of his steam locomotive. And so that's going to be able to transport things. There's no engineer in this one. This was his early prototype. It was run off of steam power. The steam would build up in this compartment here. As the steam builds up, it pushes this rod out, which then moves each one of these levers. As long as you kept putting water and kept it heated, it would run continuously.
It runs on water.
They would start using coal a few years after this. Not too much longer. Okay, so some do, yes. We will pick up here next time on Monday.